Hello and welcome. For China Solved, this is Andrew Hupert. Today we're looking at part 2 of Building Your China Negotiating Team. Today's talk, it takes a team. In the last video we talked about planning and building a negotiating team that will do well in China. Today we're going to look at the mechanics of how to build and manage negotiations with a team. Remember, Americans tend to send individuals or small groups to negotiate. It's often a delegated function. We have salesmen or purchasing managers or administrative supervisors who negotiate face-to-face and then report back to senior management. That approach tends to lead to problems in China. In China, you'll do better with a matrix approach. Let's take a look at this on the chart. On the far left, you see the generic admin function. For our purposes, that will be the different levels of salespeople that are in charge of this particular negotiation if you are trying to distribute, purchasing people if you're sourcing, and supervisors in the case of manufacturing or running staff or partnerships. Then you're going to have finance people, technical people, legal people. The list may be bigger than this, but the point is you're going to have representation from different levels. For the main function, be it admin or sales or purchasing, you're going to want people from all levels who are intimately acquainted with the deal and know the other side. Now, not everyone has to be in every meeting every time, but be aware that Chinese teams are known to be bigger and, let's use the phrase, holistic, in that they are willing to look at every aspect of a deal and make some pretty big changes pretty suddenly. And that can include the scope of the deal, the amount of investment, and the amount of involvement from you or from them. Since they are showing up with every department and every level of management represented, this can throw you off guard. This is not always accidental. You have to be ready with the resources to respond and the firepower to say no. Remember, Western negotiators who show up without the authority to hit the brakes or hit the gas are at a disadvantage, and that works against them. Now that we know who makes up the team, let's take a look at some specific challenges that American and European negotiating teams face in China. And the three that I'm going to look at right now are preparation, project management, and information flows. When it comes to preparation, the first issue is setting the agenda. This is something you should do at home, in your own HQ, among your own team members first, and then repeat the process in China. Let's take a look at what I mean. Think of an agenda as the table of contents of a negotiation. It includes all the variables and deal points that are part of your goal. In the US and the West, we don't think about the agenda too much because institutional and regulatory frameworks are pretty complete and familiar. We have laws, we have reputation, we have brands to protect. In China, things can be different. There's very little institutional support, at least for the Western side, and the risks of bad quality, asset theft, and pirated intellectual property are much, much higher. So you have to negotiate your deal agendas twice, once within your own organization and then with the Chinese side. You're always going to make sure that quality control and intellectual property protection are on the agenda. If you want to know how to get started setting an agenda for a Chinese negotiation, start with these 5 basic questions. And these are internal prep questions. These are things that you're going to want to discuss with the stakeholders in your own organization, everyone that's involved in that China team. Question 1, what do you want from this negotiation in the short term? And 2, what do you want in the longer term? It sounds simple enough, but remember our SMART goals: specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely. And that leads to question number 3. What does short-term and long-term mean to everyone on your team? Legal, manufacturing, sales, and purchasing may have very different ideas of what short-term and long-term means. For number 4, you've got to define a win very carefully. Because again, different departments may have very different definitions. Everyone's going to start out the same. I want to sell a lot of product. I want to buy high quality resources. I want to run my China operation at a profit. But, and the but from different departments is what you're really going to focus on here. And number 5, what can go wrong? This is probably the most important pre-negotiation discussion you can have. Make sure you uncover all the possible dangers and pitfalls and then develop ways of dealing with them before you start talking to the Chinese counterparties. When you take all the answers to these 5 questions from all the different departments and boil them down to a set of key deal points, this is going to make up your negotiating agenda in China. And final note on the agenda has to do with setting benchmarks. Benchmarks are objective measurements that both sides can agree on, and you're going to have to determine and negotiate what your benchmarks are early in the negotiating phase with the Chinese side. So you got to decide this internally first. How are you going to benchmark quality, and how are you going to benchmark IP protection? For quality, you can see the big questions. What objective measurements are you using? Who is going to check quality? When and where are quality going to be decided on? And what are you going to do if quality is unacceptable? Don't let the Chinese side push these questions off until later or to be decided by someone else. Handle this early. And the second part is just as important, IP protection. What benchmarks are you going to use? So questions to answer beforehand are, who owns the IP in China? In other words, you're going to have patents, trademarks, and registrations handled specifically for the China market. Your international protections don't work in China. So who's going to do that? And who's going to own that? What's going to be transferred? The Chinese side is in business with you because they want some form of IP transfer. So get this on the table early and be ready to make concessions. Who, what, when, and how will intellectual property be transferred? The why? Because that's what they really want from you. And if you don't negotiate this early, it's going to be decided for you later. Now, the next thing to decide is how you're going to manage this negotiation and the business in China. How is information going to be moved around within your own company? You need two-way information flows. You need a way of getting good information from the front line back to the strategic decision makers within your own company. And you have to be realistic about this. American companies are famous for saying that they always listen to people, and people are our number one asset, and we listen to our front lines. We all know that there can be gaps in the way information is transferred from the front line back to C-level decision makers, but in China that can be an expensive oversight. So you develop good ways of getting not just quantitative but also qualitative information. So let's conclude by looking at some China negotiating team best practices. First, you're going to need to put together a multi-level, multidisciplinary team that involves all the different talent and all the different levels of authority that you'll need to negotiate effectively. You need better ways of monitoring and getting feedback from frontline negotiators about what's really happening with your Chinese counterparty. And finally, new rules for negotiating. One-size-fits-all policies often fail in China. You're going to want a different approach to how you set agendas, how you measure quality, and how you protect your intellectual property when negotiating with a Chinese counterparty. Thanks very much. For China Solved, this has been Andrew Huppert. I look forward to working with you again soon.